General Hospital will reveal Willow was once the embodiment of maternal resilience, a woman who fought tirelessly through illness, loss, and heartbreak for the sake of her children. In the eyes of many in Port Charles, she had survived what no mother should ever endure and emerged stronger, determined to protect Wiley and Amelia with every ounce of strength she had left. Her journey had been marked by moments of quiet heroism, of deep love, of self-sacrifice so raw it left scars on her soul. But now, she stood not as a figure of courage, but as the center of an incomprehensible tragedy, one she had authored with her own hand. When Micheal returned to Port Charles carrying a court-sanctioned temporary custody order for Wiley and Amelia, most believed it would be the wake-up call Willow so desperately needed. After all, the threat of losing both her children should have shaken her to her core. And yet, nothing stirred within her. The woman who had once leapt into fire, figuratively and literally, for her children now stared blankly at legal documents while clutching the hand of Drew, the man who had become her obsession. Her heart, once tethered to the rhythms of her children's laughter and needs, now beat solely for a man whose every whisper of devotion masked manipulation and control. Her love for Drew had long transcended the bounds of reason, becoming something twisted, unhealthy, and entirely consuming. It had begun innocently, an admiration for his strength, his charm, his attention when she was at her weakest. But that admiration metastasized into blind worship. With each moment Drew shielded her from criticism. Each compliment he showered upon her while the world questioned her judgment, Willow receded further from reality. His words became gospel, and in time, she believed what he told her. That Micheal was the villain, that the court would never separate a mother from her children, and that all she had to do was remain loyal to him and everything would be fine. But everything was not fine. In a move that sent shockwaves through the community, Willow signed away her parental rights. There was no court battle, no final plea, no tears. Just a cold, deliberate signature on a piece of paper that severed the last ties between her and the children she once claimed to live for. To shield herself from the inevitable scorn and condemnation, she constructed a story, intricate, tragic, and utterly deceitful. She told the court and her family that she was suffering from a debilitating psychological disorder. A trauma-induced condition rooted in her horrific childhood under the dominion of a now-dead cult leader named Curry's. According to her claims, the years spent in that oppressive, extremist environment had left her broken, incapable of emotional regulation, and unfit to raise children. It was a convenient lie, a calculated escape hatch. She spoke of mental collapse, of needing years of treatment, of fearing she would transfer her unresolved traumas onto Wiley and Amelia. But everyone who knew Willow, truly knew her, saw through the veil. Her erratic behavior was not the result of a resurfaced past, but of a present utterly consumed by her pathological attachment to Drew. Her diagnosis, while plausible on paper, was a smokescreen for the real reason she had abandoned her children. She had chosen a man over them. For Micheal, the revelation was equal parts devastating and liberating. He had loved Willow, once, with every part of himself. He had stood by her through sickness, through grief, through the unthinkable. But this abandonment of her own children in favor of a manipulative man who had driven a wedge through their family, was unforgivable. And yet, as he watched her walk away from Wiley and Amelia without a backward glance, he felt an unexpected sense of peace. No longer would he have to share parenting decisions with someone who placed her desires above the well-being of her kids. No longer would his children be pulled into the chaos of a woman ruled by delusions of love. What Willow had done was horrifying, but it had clarified everything. Micheal was now the sole anchor in Wiley and Amelia's lives. And he would not fail them. Nina, however, was left broken. The biological mother who had only recently begun to mend her fractured relationship with Willow now watched it unravel into something unrecognizable. She had believed, perhaps naively, that the maternal bond, once rediscovered, would be enough to steer her daughter back to sanity, to family, to purpose. But now, Witnessing her daughter choose a man universally reviled over the flesh and blood she had carried, Nina felt betrayed in a way words could never capture. It wasn't just about the children. It was about everything Willow had thrown away, every lesson, every second chance, every outstretched hand. To Nina, the lie about the cult was more than a fabrication, it was a weapon. Used to wound not only her, but the community that had embraced Willow. People began to whisper in grocery store aisles, to shift uncomfortably at the mention of her name. The narrative was falling apart. And while Drew continued to play the devoted protector in public, those closest to the situation saw him for what he was. A master manipulator who had isolated a vulnerable woman and turned her against everything she once held dear. As days passed, Willow vanished from public life. She and Drew moved to a quiet estate on the outskirts of town, rarely seen, always together. Photos of them surfaced online, smiling on beaches, holding hands at secluded resorts. A portrait of happiness built on the ruins of abandonment. And yet, behind the perfect filters and polished captions, a darker truth festered. Willow's eyes, once full of fire and compassion, now looked vacant. Her smile seemed rehearsed. Her presence, eerie in its stillness. Meanwhile, Wiley and Amelia slowly adjusted to life without their mother. Wiley, now old enough to understand fragments of the chaos, became more withdrawn, more somber. He asked about Willow less frequently with each passing week. Amelia, too young to remember much, clung to Micheal and Carly with unwavering trust. The home they created together was not perfect, but it was real, stable, filled with warmth and laughter. The contrast between their world and the sterile silence of Willow's new life could not have been starker. Port Charles had seen its fair share of heartbreak, but none quite like this. The fall of Willow was not a sudden collapse, but a slow erosion, a quiet undoing of everything she once was. And in the quiet aftermath, a question lingered in every mind. How could someone who had once loved so fiercely fall so far? The answer may never be fully known. But for Micheal, for Nina, for Wiley and Amelia, the scars of Willow's choice would linger long after the headlines faded. In stark contrast to Nina's heartbreak and fury, Drew walked away from the custody battle with his head held high, the glint of victory unmistakable in his eyes. To him, this outcome was not a matter of chance, it was the calculated result of months, even years, of strategic manipulation. He had not won Willow overnight. It had been a process of subtle infiltration, of methodically eroding her support systems while cloaking himself in the image of stability, empathy, and devotion. He recognized the cracks in her emotional armor. The loneliness that came after Michael's emotional withdrawal, the vulnerability left behind by her illness and trauma. And he used every one of those cracks as a foothold to climb into her world. Into her heart, until he stood alone at the center of it. Drew didn't need to force Willow to love him, he made her believe she needed him. He wove himself into her grief, her confusion, her moments of doubt. He positioned himself as the only one who truly understood her, who didn't judge her past or question her decisions. He spoke in soft tones, with perfectly timed concern, praising her strength while quietly seeding resentment toward those who once stood closest to her, Micheal, Carly, even Nina. Every compliment came with a caveat, every reassurance with a subtext. And slowly, Willow began to turn away from the people who had once defined her world, her family, her identity. Now, nestled in the quiet luxury of a high-end apartment overlooking the serene outskirts of Port Charles, Drew and Willow lived in a carefully curated illusion. The home was immaculate. The furniture hand-picked for elegance and comfort, the windows large enough to flood every room with light, but none of it could wash away the shadows that clung to the corners. Willow moved through the space like a ghost of her former self, her footsteps soundless, her laughter extinct. Each morning began with a routine designed to convince herself that she was at peace. A carefully steeped cup of herbal tea, a few chapters of a novel she rarely finished, pages of a journal filled with trembling handwriting and half-truths. In her diary, she wrote of hope, how one day Wiley and Amelia would understand why she had left them behind. She clung to the fantasy that her children would see past the headlines and the public judgment and realize she had done it all out of necessity, not desire. That they would forgive her. That they would come looking for her. But the ink on the pages betrayed her, hesitant, unsure, crumbling under the weight of denial. Deep down, Willow knew she had surrendered, not sacrificed. And worse, she had done so willingly. Meanwhile, the children she left behind were adapting to a new kind of normal. Wiley, once a cheerful and inquisitive little boy, had grown more withdrawn since his mother's departure. He asked fewer questions now, seemingly accepting that Willow would not be returning. He often sat quietly with his toys, pausing to glance at old photos that Carly refused to remove from the living room shelves. Amelia, still a toddler, no longer cried for her mother at night. Her world had slowly reshaped itself around Michael's steady presence and Carly's unshakable warmth. Their home, though bruised by betrayal, was healing. What stunned Port Charles wasn't just the loss of custody, it was the transformation of a woman who had once been a symbol of strength in the face of tragedy. Willow had been their miracle story. The mother who had battled leukemia and emerged a fierce guardian of her children's futures. She had been the woman who stood firm when doctors said she might not survive. Who had held Wiley close during sleepless nights of uncertainty. Her resilience had inspired a community. And now, that same woman had turned her back on everything she once held sacred. The whispers began quietly, behind closed doors and in hushed phone calls. They grew louder in grocery stores, at school pickup lines, during hospital shifts. People speculated endlessly, what had changed? Was she ever the woman they thought she was? Or had Drew uncovered something darker within her? Rumors swirled about the cult she claimed to have escaped. The mental illness she cited in court. But nothing explained the unrelenting devotion she now offered to a man who had torn her from her children and isolated her from every ally she once had. And yet, Drew reveled in it. He portrayed himself publicly as a loving partner, doting and present, while quietly tightening his hold on Willow's life. He ensured she had everything she needed, except the space to reflect or the courage to leave. His brand of control was not loud or violent, it was polished, subtle. Dressed in tailored suits and gentle words. He didn't forbid her from contacting her children, he simply reminded her why she shouldn't. That they were better off. That her presence would only hurt them. That Michael would turn them against her anyway. In time, Willow stopped fighting back. She stopped checking Wiley's school reports. Stopped asking for pictures of Amelia. She convinced herself that this was what peace looked like. Stillness, silence, surrender. She told herself that motherhood, perhaps, had never been her calling. That loving Drew was her destiny now. That the world had simply misunderstood her. But the truth lingered in the unspoken. In the way her hands trembled when she passed a park filled with children's laughter. In the way her breath caught when she saw a mother lifting her child into a car seat. In the way she avoided mirrors, because the woman staring back no longer looked like someone who had once fought to live for her children, but someone who now barely existed for herself. Willow's fall from grace was not a dramatic explosion, but a slow descent, a series of compromises she could never take back. Port Charles mourned her, not with funerals or flowers, but with the aching recognition that some tragedies were no headstones. That some losses come not in death, but in the willing forfeiture of love, of purpose, of self. And somewhere, behind closed curtains and expensive blinds, Drew watched her with quiet satisfaction. Because to him, this wasn't just love. This was ownership. And in the end, he had everything he wanted, except her soul, which, though broken, still mourned the mother she used to be. And as the courthouse prepared to reopen its doors for the final hearing, the one that would permanently determine the legal custody of Wiley and Amelia, there was still no sign of Willow. The courtroom waited, attorneys shuffled their papers, the judge took their seat, and the gallery whispered among themselves, wondering if this would be the moment she reclaimed her motherhood. But she never came. There was no appeal filed. No request for an emergency continuance. No surprise witness or desperate 11th-hour plea. No lawyer was retained on her behalf. Willow remained silent, absent not only from the proceedings but from the very fight for her children. She chose instead to stay in the shadows with Drew. Wrapped in the illusion of a love so consuming that it had swallowed her completely. She had convinced herself that the world outside, the one filled with judgment, legal terms, and maternal obligations, had nothing left to offer her. Drew's whispered reassurances had become her gospel, that love could be enough, that they didn't need anyone else. That Wiley and Amelia would one day find their way back to her. That their little family, fractured, isolated, quietly tragic, was still whole in some metaphysical sense. But was it truly enough? In that sanctuary of denial, Willow was slowly unraveling. Each day she stayed away from her children, she drifted further from the woman she once was. She no longer attended therapy. She no longer reached out to old friends. Even her daily rituals, once soothing, now mechanical, were fading into nothingness. Her journal pages remained blank, the tea in her cup went cold. And the novels gathered dust on the nightstand. She had traded the chaos of reality for the stillness of delusion, and in doing so, lost not just her role as a mother, but her identity, her dignity, and the last remnants of her inner light. When the judge finally rendered the decision that many already anticipated, granting Micheal full legal and physical custody of both Wiley and Amelia, there was no audible gasp in the room. There was only a haunting silence, thick with the weight of sorrow and unspoken grief. Port Charles did not celebrate. No one clapped. No one smiled. It was not a victory anyone had wished for. Only one that had become necessary. Outside the courthouse, the city seemed to hold its breath. Nina emerged from the building slowly, her posture heavy, her expression distant. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she turned toward the courthouse steps, her gaze fixed on the empty space to her left, the place where her daughter should have been. She had waited, foolishly. Hopefully, for some sign that Willow might appear. That she might come running down the corridor with apologies and desperation in her voice, fighting to reclaim her children. But that moment never came. And in its absence, Nina felt something inside her begin to collapse. Not with rage, but with quiet devastation, the slow, aching kind that hollows a mother out from within. She stood there, blinking into the sunlight, searching the crowd for the figure she knew wasn't coming. Not far from her, Micheal stood beside his legal team, not triumphant. Not vindicated, only resolute. There was no satisfaction in his expression, no sense of having won. Instead, he knelt down and took Wiley's hand in his own, squeezing it gently as the boy looked up at him with questioning eyes. Then he lifted Amelia into his arms, holding her close, her tiny hands clutching the collar of his jacket. His jaw was tight. His eyes misted, not from victory, but from the enormous responsibility that now rested on his shoulders. He knew what had been lost here. This wasn't just about legal custody. This was about two children who would grow up with only half of their origin story intact, whose mother had chosen absence over presence, fantasy over reality, a man over the sacred bond of family. Micheal knew that he would have to do more than just raise them, he would have to heal them. He would have to fill the void left by the one person whose embrace should have been there first. Their constant. He would have to answer the questions they would ask in the years to come. Why did she leave? Didn't she love us? Was it our fault? He had no good answers. Only a promise, that he would love them enough for both parents, that he would never abandon them, never make them feel unloved or unwanted. And as he stood there with one child in each arm, he looked up at the courthouse and exhaled slowly, as if releasing the last fragment of hope that Willow might still come back. But even hope, like love, can only survive so many betrayals. Somewhere across town, in a sun-drenched apartment that felt more like a mausoleum than a home, Willow sat by the window, staring blankly at the horizon. The television played quietly in the background, tuned to a channel she wasn't watching. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, unbrushed, forgotten. Drew was in the kitchen, humming a tune that had long since lost its warmth. She didn't respond when he called her name. She didn't move when he touched her shoulder. She just sat there, motionless. A shell of the woman she had once been. And maybe, in that moment, somewhere deep beneath the layers of delusion and denial, a sliver of truth pierced through the haze, one that whispered the words she had tried so hard to silence: "They're gone. And you let them go."